Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us tonight, once again, Mr. Harry Gross. Welcome,
Hello.
Harry.
Thank you
As
very much.
many viewers may know, Harry is a man of opinions, and he's traveled in circles that I have not. And one place he's gone in several times would be Cuba. And I think if we're looking at what's up, I believe for the point of view of Cuba, it's probably useful. The U.S. has been distracted in the Middle East right now. I mean, they're sort of not watching it too carefully.
No, that we are very much watching it carefully.
Okay, good. Well, we'll get into some opinions about that. So I'm going to make this point. I think that the word communism has not been used for a long time, and it was a sign of being a little antediluvian if you actually said, well, these communists are doing something, communists are doing this. And I certainly grew up and came of age in the period where the U.S. was tussling with a Russian bear. All of the attention in the world was there. Nuclear holocaust was around. The communist system was at least touted as being extremely evil, and it generally, once it was instituted, millions of people died. Once it was there, the people had a very miserable life in general. The standard of living dropped, the commissars really sort of manipulated the people, if you want to say that. At least that was the idea, and they took the fruits of the system and abused them, and they exalted in the system they had. And well, all right. So the idea is it's pretty bad, and the idea is the U.S. battled communism for a substantial period of time. In the middle of this was the 1962. Situation with Cuba, the boycott, whatever happened, we're a cat's whisker away from nuclear holocaust. The Cubans were seemingly delighted to, I mean, at least might be I'm not saying they were, but this is great. Now we protect ourselves. The revolution is preserved. For many, many reasons, the idea was that capitalism was terrible. The people that were there were abusive, and so a tremendous number of people left Cuba. Many of them are here. They will constantly speak about how bad the communist system is. They've saved the deeds to their houses and their farms, which the government just took everything. So we'll say, okay, there's at least if there are merits in communism, and there could well be some, there's certainly the history of it in the 20th century makes people are rather nervous about it. Mm-hmm. That's an understatement. And certainly the democratic socialists are, I would say, who knows what they're really are like, but they're tilting in that direction, and I can remember, and we've had issues in the country about communist secrets going to the Soviet Union, on and on. So the idea is pretty firmly imprinted that the communists are bad, and the mayor of New York is a democratic socialist, and then people push it a little bit to say, well, the guy's a communist or at least a Marxist. So that's been said. The same way that people, you could say, a rightist government, people would say it's fascist, or if they really want to push it, and they say Nazis were in the White House. And so there's a hyperbole that exists on the left and the right. And so we have the situation in Cuba. You've been there, and the ideals of the revolution. I mean, you could say there's some noble ideals in the revolution, but I would say on the ground, I mean, I've been there. It's terrible. It's absolutely awful. And in general, I think what people would say is, well, this has nothing to do with communism and the communist system. This is all vengeful American policy. And if we were able to not, if the U.S. became, let's say, like Obama. When Obama came there, I think we had a baseball match or whatever. The Cubans just went crazy. We're going to have a good relationship with the U.S. Maybe, and then communism could really flourish. You could say all the greatness of the system would appear. In any event, we're now in a situation where you've had experience there.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a little, but not as much as you. And it appears, as far as I can see, that the U.S. is basically embargoed or stopped energy coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And it formerly came from Venezuela. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I don't speak Spanish that well, but I was watching Cuban television when I was there, and they certainly it was constantly their view of history and the situation in Venezuela was quite touted, and so there's the idea is that if all the Latin American people can get together, we can have a much better system, and we can toss the Yankees back in a garbage can. Well, all right. So I've talked a little bit about it. What's your view on this, Harry?
Oh God, where do I start? I think the Cuban. Let's start with the reality on the ground. The Cuban Revolution has failed fundamentally.
Well, that's a big thing to say.
That it was dependent on. It did a lot of good things.
Yes.
It did a lot of good things for the Cuban people, but it was really dependent upon Cuba's ability to industrialize, which it was unable to do. It was dependent then upon Soviet largesse, which then disappeared in 1989. And then it was dependent upon foreign oil, primarily from Venezuela.
And sending their doctors to different countries and getting some money.
Yes, and getting money, and that's its medical diplomacy was certainly
and getting money from all of the people that left. And so I think that's one big fact here. If you're going to put your system together, and that generally happens when I'd say a revolution occurs, a tremendous upheaval in the social order. Where the big dogs are getting nipped a lot and their property influence is going away, so people leave. And a huge number of really energetic Cubans have left. Yep. I mean, really huge numbers of them. And they've done very energetic, whatever, and that makes it easier for the regime there to stay in power. Everybody, I don't have to shoot anybody. You're all going to leave. Yep. You're not going to be blowing bridges up or anything. So if those people had stayed, it would have been whatever.
Yeah,
but it was good. It would, and just to get out of the place, people were happy to do that. I mean, but we have that situation. So failures and successes. And what I want to bring this point up. Yes, the U.S. Embargo, whatever you want to say, has had a bad economic influence. That's true. But there's more to it than that.
Absolutely. But the issue is that American policy towards Cuba has been a massive own goal, because the context in which the United States and Cuba have operated for over a century is one in which the United States has consistently had designs on Cuba. And Cuba has consistently felt threatened by the United States.
I think that's a reasonable thing to say.
There was, when Cuba got its independence, before Cuba even got its independence, there were several efforts by the United States to purchase Cuba. There were talks of invading Cuba and annexing it to itself. The only thing that stopped it, really post-Civil War, was how do you integrate a country that still has an enslaved population?
When did slavery end in Cuba? Do you know?
Officially, it ended in the 1820s. Unofficially, it did not end until the 1880s.
So it went. Many countries had slavery. After
that, and so that which gives Cuba a very interesting character, because it's much more. It has a much stronger African influence than other Latin American countries, particularly in the Spanish Empire. And there's a large Afro-Cuban population that has played a pivotal role in Cuba's sense of self-identity and the shape of the revolution. Because as part of these American designs, one of the things that was insisted upon, particularly after Cuba was granted independence by the United States in 1904, because we took direct control of them from Spain in 1898, one of the things that we insisted upon was effectively the creation, at least in the major cities, of the reimposition of Jim Crow, so that Southern tourists could go to Havana and not feel like they were in somewhere that was threatened. When Batista, who was elected president from 1940 to 1944, was one of the greatest successful presidents earlier, before he seized power in 1952 in a coup, he was incredibly controversial because he was of mixed race. He was one of the first non-white heads of state in the Western world. Was incredibly controversial. But the way that he was allowed to hold power by the United States was he agreed to effectively keep everyone else down. And that sowed a lot of tension within Cuban society. The United States intervened militarily 19 times in Cuba between 1904 and 1959. And when Batista seized power in 1952 in this coup...
Did they intervene? Did they change the government?
Yes.
They sent Marines into Havana, and they threw the government out 19 times?
19 times.
Really?
No one ruled in Havana without American approval.
I know that, but as far as we're going to send Marines in, we're arresting you, we're putting you in jail.
Sometimes it wasn't necessarily
I don't think it was
boots on the ground.
So it was just
but
use of...
So in 1933, for example... Grau San Martin was elected to the presidency, and he was a much more progressive, bordering on socialist figure. Very much was a Cuban nationalist who wanted to do Cuba for Cubans and strike out away from kind of American policy. The United States sent 2 battleships in the Havana harbor and said they're not leaving until the Grau government is gone.
Right.
And we found a amenable military figures who said, yeah, sure, we'll get rid of them. So we didn't deploy Marines, but we sent the Navy down.
So it was right. But I mean, I think there's some points that I think are fair. Number one is the racial situation in Cuba was a very powerful thing, and so they had sort of a plantation arrangement, and then people had some money. They live in Havana, but out in the country, people were in a state of semi-bondage, you could say. So if your skin was dark, then you're going to have a difficult situation there.
And the United States is about 15 to 20%, I think, black in population. I think it's about 15 to 20% of the population. And Cuba's over 30%.
Yeah, it's a big issue.
And so, I mean, in the sense, so racial politics are much more up front and center, particularly in the context of slavery lasting so long practically.
There's some complexities which are there. I mean, it's not so simple. In other
words, I'm not saying it's simple. I'm saying that's one.
The Catholic Church may make things a little easier. So, I mean, you could say the way that Europeans and darker skinned people got along in Latin America, people might say they're not as difficult as in the American South.
That's largely also because by 1825, the colonial regimes had mostly been overthrown. After 1832, it was just Cuba and Puerto Rico left in Spanish hands, and then Brazil was in Portuguese hands until the 1880s. And again, slavery lasted until the 1880s
they had their emperor,
in Brazil.
Well, they had an emperor. I'm not sure whether in Portuguese hands. They had an emperor. They were independent, Brazil was, but they had their own emperor.
Yes, who was the House of Braganza, who was the Portuguese
That's right.
emperor.
So they were not, per se, a Portuguese colony, although I don't think in the 1880s.
No, but by that point, they was the same royal family.
Well, they had a royal family that was finally tossed out. So, but
it was the same royal family.
Moving past the situation in Cuba, so we have all these issues.
So we have all these issues,
and the story is, you could say that one of the things about the revolution is the people that remain there can feel proud about it, and the propaganda that's there and the going to prison, the things that are there, it's sort of a terrorist government in a way, if you're a citizen.
If you're really cynical, but compared to the Batista government, particularly when the revolution first takes power, the Batista government was infamous for its persecution of the population, for disappearing people, for torturing dissidents. So when the revolution comes to power, there's a great deal of sympathy for most Cubans. It really isn't until the 60s that's kind of burned through.
And so, yeah, since it was a great sympathy in America. So Woody Allen or whatever, I mean, the idea is, well, people sort of liked Castro. He was sort of a cool guy, and he was going to make, and there was a great tolerance. So, and the idea, well, it's sort of a, not so much a narco state, but a criminal state. They had all the deals with the mafia, all the stuff going on.
Batista's nickname was Mr. 10%. You could do anything you want in Havana as long as you gave him 10%.
So it's extraordinarily corrupt. The situation is bad. And then this revolution occurs, somewhat of a glorious one, you could say. And in the wings, the U.S. was there, kind of. The question is
still actively supporting the Batista government in the process.
Well, in the wings, and
we were still sending guns and planes and training Cuban security personnel throughout all of this.
In other words, the amount of support was not adequate to, which wouldn't have been unbelievable amount to have preserved the administration. No. But I mean, I think in general, Americans thought, well, these guys are, sort of crooked and whatever, there's sort of another dictator there, and maybe it'll be a purgative event to get another regime in. These guys up in the mountains, they're patriotic, and maybe they'll make it a lot better. Well, that everyone was quite surprised, and indeed, property expropriation. We're going to, Moscow is our buddy there, whatever, right in the middle of the Cold War.
Well, to be fair, again, let's keep the context in here. So, January 1st, 1959, is when the revolution wins, quote unquote. Batista flees New Year's Eve, 1958. And when Castro comes to power, it is very much the idea of his goal is to create independent Cuba that respect its sovereignty relative to the United States, but to be a friend to the United States. Now, his brother Raul is definitely in the background talking with the Soviets. Raul was a communist through and through, is making side deals, but Fidel's main thing is just trying to get sovereignty respected. He goes to the United States on a goodwill tour, is well respected. He's well received, particularly in Harlem.
It was great. I mean, so people were saying...
But two people did not like him. Eisenhower, who thought that he was a jumped-up revolutionary and didn't have any business being in government, and Richard Nixon. And Nixon is the one who... Eisenhower refused to meet with Castro. Nixon's the one who sent, and Nixon comes to the conclusion that Castro cannot be trusted, which at the time is parlance for he will not do what we want him to do. Well, that's because the same language is used for Sukarno, Indonesia, for Arbenz in Guatemala, for all sorts of global leaders at the time. That if a leader cannot be trusted was shorthand the American government for they will not be a pliant puppet of ours.
Well, you say Putin. Maybe Putin can't be trusted, or anybody.
I'm not in the very specific context of the Eisenhower administration and the Dulles brothers in the CIA and in the State Department. In that particular context. And Eisenhower was so opposed to Castro. There are two assassination orders that are signed for the first time ever by a United States president in 1960. The first is Patrice Lumumba in the Congo. The second is Fidel Castro. And we immediately began planning operations to overthrow Castro's government as it became clear that he was intent on dismantling the existing Cuban government, which meant dismantling American property interests. The United Fruit Company, for example, owned about 20% of Cuba. The 20% of Cuba's land was owned by an American corporation. And Castro offered compensation at fair market value. Now, it was not a lot comparatively.
Fair is a tricky word, right?
Well, okay. But what his compensation was offered and refused. And...
Well, that's not an uncommon story. I mean, so you could say the petroleum situation in Venezuela. Mm-hmm. People say, "Well, we're going to compensate you for it. It will give you $2 for 100. We'll give you a little money, and you will obviate your claim with just peanuts." And so, reasonably, people didn't do that.
Well, but I would say at the same time, does the United States have a right to another country's land?
Good question. And so
that was Castro's point.
So the question would be capitalism. So does in other words, if let's say if the British have invested in the U.S. or something like that, and we decide to take everything, we just do it. that's going to cause some problems.
Yeah.
I mean, with the Brits, and that would be
It
normal.
would cause problems.
And so, and then many people would like that. We're going to just take whatever we want to take, and that's not an uncommon.
It's not an uncommon story.
And so,
but
if you invest in the issue is if you have overseas property, and there's a huge amount of capital that productively went into Cuba. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting. I know you've had experience in the backwoods there, mm-hmm. but if you go out and you look at the agrarian situation, it's a real fertile, man, this place is just boom, boom, boom. That's not the case at all.
Actually, it is.
Is it?
So it is one of the greenest places I've ever
been in my
life.
I know it's green. I know that, but not taking
fertility. Now, there's a lot of land that is a problem because you have 500 years of sugar cultivation, which has really decimated the soil. But when you have proper agricultural management, it's
as you well know, I mean, the idea there is the government is controlling things, and they're blundering around with it. So that's one of the problems with communism, and indeed with any state economic system, is for many reasons they're not nimble, they're not jumping around, somebody's not staying up all night doing some kind of deal, coming up with new ways to do things.
Well, they are.
In Cuba they don't seem to be doing it. Well, are they? But so, in other words, one of the things about as you well know, the diet there has gone from beef, which is almost unobtainable, to pigs, to finally rabbits, mm-hmm. if they can get that. Eggs are unobtainable, whatever. They're very expensive. So the country, with the great fertility that it has, so okay, let's get those Americans out, whatever they're up to, they're using this land, whatever. And now the land, I would say, and I know you've had experience, I think the Episcopal Church has a farm there, mm-hmm. Which you've sort of ramrodded.
Yes.
And I'll let it go at that, but I don't believe the agricultural situation is booming. It's certainly not providing food for the Cubans. And the story, it's maybe an apocryphal story, but someone, if you shoot somebody there, and I don't know, or kill someone, maybe you'll get, I don't know what, 10 years in prison, but the government is in charge of all the cows.
Well, so
if
you're
you
referring
shoot
to a special
cow,
period.
you kill a cow. Mm-hmm. Then the government is going to put you in. It's the government's cow. They're going to put you in jail for longer than if you had killed a human.
For the record, let me tell you exactly what you're talking about. So when the Soviet Union collapsed and Cuba lost all of its outside funding, its economy contracted by an average of 30%, upwards of 50% in some places. The Great Recession in 2008 was a 2% contraction in the United States mm-hmm. economy, right? And so the economy collapsed overnight. Mm-hmm. What had been stable, prosperous land now it's a free-for-all. And cattle was a prime drive for starving people because there was enough. There was a lot of food that had been imported from the Soviet Union. And so the law was changed. Cattle was nationalized by the government. And so, yes, there is in many cases it was more serious to kill a cow.
That's right.
Well, no, not to eat beef, but to steal a cow and to murder it.
Right, you murder the government's cow.
Yeah, you murder the government's cow
because you were hungry.
Because you were hungry, but in the sense, the idea though was that in doing so, you've deprived, dozens of people of the food that could have come from that cow, particularly if it's a dairy cow, then you've lost the supply of milk and cheese and the like.
Well, so you're defending the government's ownership of the cows.
No, what I'm defending is the rationale of economics at this point, in that it was a protection of short-sightedness economically. Now, and what it did was it preserved the agricultural field to some degree. The farm that I work with is a dairy farm, so I'm very familiar with these laws on cattle. And the problem is still there today because of the current sanctions by the United States that have really been exacerbated by the second Trump administration and the complete blockade. But COVID really was the first big death knell in the revolution. At this point, and because tourism ended, and that was what had been making up the loss. Then American sanctions meant that nobody can do business there anymore, and now there's no oil. And so Havana has blackouts 22 to 23 hours a day. Some areas in the country have blackouts that last days at a time. There's no jet fuel, so nobody can get there and refuel, so tourism is dead. The farm that I work with has had to sell 90% of its cattle herd to protect them from being slaughtered.
Yeah,
by people. I mean, because the situation is that desperate. They're now eating. They're past eating rabbits and pigs. They're eating cats and dogs.
Oh, really?
In the countryside in some places.
Maybe you don't see many cats or dogs there.
I mean,
they're eating them, right? Well,
now they are. I remember when that used to be a much better place until the last really year and a half. Well, 250,000 people left Cuba this past year.
You know, just to make a point. I mean, so if you talk to, a Cuban commissar, this place, all we need is the U.S. to blow up and go away, and this place will be a paradise. Everybody will be great, rich, whatever. And the other point I think ought to be brought up is how the military gets economic advantage. So the commissars get a lot of advantage, and there are no direct elections. So it's not, and you can't just go on TV and oppose the government. So this is a very restrictive arrangement, which is one of the things, I'm going to make a point here, one of the things that goes along, if you say, I have a moral principle that trumps everything. My moral principle is that I'm going to make the country equal. Everybody is going to be equal in this country, and I can do anything to preserve that moral principle. And even if it sort of slides a little bit, and the animal farm story, so some pigs are more equal than other pigs. Yeah. So it sort of slides a little bit. So it starts with that. And it really is a very the world system is going to, as it looks in the future, you could say Marxism. There's some ideas there. Maybe there's something that could be extracted from something, but the actual system, and which it seems to be, is we're going to take over. Shoot all the farm owners, drive them out, do whatever, and we're going to put our guys in there, and then we're going to not let anybody challenge us, and that's kind of what goes on. And you could also say,
not really.
Well, I'm going to expand.
You're exaggerating.
I know, slightly I am, but I think that's the point. I think the same thing you might say about Iran. I mean, you're saying you have a system there. It's not quite the same, but you have a relatively minority of people that are dedicated. In that case, it would be to a certain Islamic viewpoint, and the way they've construed history, and also the idea of the ins and outs. And so the idea is these people are on their out group. They need to be nipped and punished a little bit. And so the history, the U.S. is this wicked place that's done all these bad things to us. So any policy initiative or whatever, I'm exaggerating slightly, but there's a lot of animus against the out group, which is normal. And I think the same thing is maybe in the Middle East a little bit.
Well, the issue is it's not an animus against an out group. It's a fear. It's an existential fear of a predator to the north, of an overwhelming might, the giant with 7-league boots, as Jose Marti called us in 1897. I started out by saying that the embargo and current American policy towards Cuba has been an own goal, in that you're right about the political line. You're absolutely right about the political line. If the United States would just go away, everything would be great. The revolution would succeed, because we keep giving them this existential threat that the government has been able to use. Not only say the government, the regime. I'm going to be very clear here, that the regime has been able to use to justify its own failings. If the United States had continued its policy that began under Obama of opening up business relationships, of expanding economic opportunity, then there was a corresponding liberalization movement within the Cuban government, because more and more everyday average Cubans were like, wait a second, the United States isn't the great evil that we've been told it is our entire lives. They are helping us. They're bringing in money. Their tourists are great. And, we want to have policy that reflects that. And if the United States ended its embargo and removed its massive restrictions on its blockade on energy and allowed capitalism to flourish, capitalism would win. Communism is a failed ideology.
Well,
It's an absolute failed ideology. I say that as someone who is a former member of the Democratic Socialists of America,
well, okay.
communism is a failed ideology.
All right. Well,
The math doesn't work. But because the United States continues to hold on to whatever weird neo-colonial grudge that we've held for over a century, we're refusing to let capitalism win in a country that desperately needs economic development, whose people are yearning for greater freedom, for greater wealth, for greater access to opportunity. And I mean, this is a country where I have met some of the most innovative and inventive people who do more who are literal MacGyvers comparatively. Imagine what they could do when given access to global markets.
Well, several million Cubans have done. They've left. The most progressive people have got the hell out of the place. And the government, the heavy hand of the government, is not something to ignore. And so the people in prison, whatever the deal is, and the benefits that the communists, being a big dog in the Communist Party there, is a big deal. And so they don't want to lose that position, in my opinion. And so the system is rigged to keep the situation there. Now, it's said that one of the great allies of the evil cabal that runs the place is the U.S.'s policy toward the place. Well, to some degree, yes, but the system is such a bad system there that it may well be that we're going to have some kind of substantial change. And the way the change takes place, I'm going to maybe conclude by saying this. One of the issues about change and encouraging people to change is that you don't want to cast them in the dirt. So you'd like sort of a gradual kind of deal. And I don't doubt that the administration is quite wicked in many places. I mean, I don't doubt that. The people, they think if I surrender power, and the fact that if we have a free election, let's throw that word out there. How about a free election in a communist country? And we actually have people advertising, they'd be tossed out like as fast as you could imagine. And so the big deal is not to let the freedom exist. Well, I hate the word. I don't hate the word freedom, but it's such a broad word that I'm cautious about using it. But that's a word that would be applicable there. All right, Harry, you've got one sentence if you want.
One sentence. The United States has a great opportunity in Cuba. We just need to seize it.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you. Thanks for your time here, Harry. It was good, very interesting conversation. Thank you.